What's going on, everyone? So today we're going to do something that I know a lot of you are excited about, which is talk about what I got wrong, and mainly around set 3, the initial kind of impressions rolling in and things like that. Not necessarily limited to leaders or cards or set 3 necessarily, just in general, some things that I thought could be strong or maybe pretty weak that ended up being really, really wrong. Now, there are, of course, a lot of different things outside of the things we're going to talk about that could be pointed to, right? In terms of, oh, I think this is a little bit better, I think this is a little bit worse, or even current opinions, etc. But these are the standouts for me, okay? These are the ones that I felt like, okay, we are really off here compared to what they actually ended up being. And honestly, there wasn't like a ton of things that I felt like were insanely off, but there were a few standouts, which is exactly why we have this video, right? So let's not waste any more time. Big thank you to my patrons over on Patreon. TCG player link in the description down below. Let's talk about all the things that I got wrong. Hey, there are some stinkers, okay? And for those of you that have been watching for a little while, I feel like you probably saw this one coming, and that's Jango Fett. So timeline for this one, okay? Jango Fett gets announced. I'm looking at him. I'm thinking, okay, why do we have a Jango Fett? He's 1 point of power less than Boba. He's the same tag, same aspects. It just seems like you're going to be playing Boba, right? So immediately I'm thinking, okay, this guy, I don't really see him taking over where Boba Fett isn't succeeding already. So I'm thinking he's probably just unplayable. Then we fast forward and Boba Fett gets banned. So what is my opinion now? I'm thinking, okay, he's going to be like a mid to high B tier leader. That's where I am extremely wrong, all right? He is one of the best leaders in the game, period, not just out of set 3, in charge of one of the strongest decks. Now, we got to see a few of those additions later on into set 3, but even after experimenting a little bit, I didn't expect him truly to see this much play. It is by far the most played deck alongside Anakin Blue, and it is extremely powerful. The tempo advantage, specifically with things like ISB Agent, Daring Raid, and P38, sets you up for such an amazing game. Now, there are some bad matchups, like Bosk Blue tends to be a matchup where you can't take advantage of the Tarkin 10. You can't take advantage of the, tempo plays that you're making. But against things like Anakin, for example, tapping down or exhausting their leader over and over again when it's supposed to be their late game win con, or seeing a Sabine with Darksaber coming down and you just, oh, I'm going to play my space unit, or I'm going to triple Dark Raid my Ruthless Raider out, tap down your unit, hit your base for 1,000,000. Those things are really, really tough to deal with, and Jango makes it look, well, pretty smooth. Now, it's not as universal as Boba Fett. We're not seeing like Jango Blues, Jango Greens, Jango Double Yellows, and Jango Reds completely dominating the meta. It is by far Jango Red specifically, so it's definitely not like Boba tier in terms of how crazy universal it was, but in its niche, which is that space tempo aggro deck, it is really, really solid. And so definitely, honestly, number 1 on my list. If I were to say, okay, what was the biggest thing you got wrong out of some of the ideas behind set 3, predictions, just power level ratings, things like that, Jango is going to be number 1 on that list for sure. Next up, we've got one that I'm a little disappointed with. This is a card that when I first saw, I was like, okay, maybe this could actually make like controlling vigilance heroism decks a thing. Like, that was my initial thought. It was, I see hello there. Maybe, just maybe, this is something that can give heroism control something going for it. I was like, okay, not as good as Power of the Dark Side base level, but it has some pros versus Power of the Dark Side. This thing can take down things like TIE Phantoms, whereas Power of the Dark Side can't. It can go ahead and go around certain things that maybe you can't finish off Power of the Dark Side, like if your opponent goes ahead and plays in their unit and you want to hit this unit specifically. But the downside to this is the fact that your opponent has to play that unit this phase, and that is a major downside. It's still okay, but if I'm building a heroism control deck, heck, look at Anakin Blue, for example. Do you see any hello there's? No. In fact, you're seeing a common perilous upgrade or perilous position in there more frequently than hello there. And on that note, why isn't like Perilous Position here? We didn't really talk about it. It's because it was one of the commons later on in the set, and it wasn't necessarily something that I had like a super high or super negative opinion on. I found it to be, okay, this could be an option. It wasn't necessarily something that was high or extremely low on my list, whereas Hello There was a standout for me, and it turned out to be kind of okay. It's something that I'll play like one or two of in my more controlling heroism decks, but if I'm playing something like an Anakin Blue where I'm trying to curve out and get some value through my units, this is oftentimes a card that doesn't even make the cut. It's something that I'd rather just play, okay, I want to play a 2 of Takedown, 1 of Fell the Dragon, 1 of Vanquish, get like kind of a removal suite in there, and this isn't included, which is very, very different from what I had expected Hello There to be. I think the biggest thing from Hello There is the fact that, well, you have to time it to where your opponent plays that unit, you can use it, but also there aren't really good finishers like there are in villainy control decks, like the Snokes or the Avengers that impact the board and slow your opponent down while also being a finisher in of itself. The only thing you really have are like Zillow Beasts and Crate Dragons, which are universal across all things, not just villainy or heroism. We don't have that great finisher where hard control heroism decks can be that viable. So if we do get that, maybe there'll be something different. But even like Double Blue Yoda or Double Blue Rey, for example, these are more hard control decks, but they tend to steer towards soft control because you're still playing a ton of units and trying to contest the board through unit value and not just playing removal effects like Hello There. And so for that reason, it's on the list today. Next up, we're going to talk about, honestly, the mechanics of set 3. One of the big things was tokens, right? This was the new thing with set 3. And this includes the Battle Droid tokens and the Clone Trooper tokens used for different strategies. But in general, there was cross synergy in that, like, there's a little bit of exploit where you can kind of pair it with some of your token generation heroism, but it's usually villainy. I think more often than not, it was coordinate, this go wide strategy that was more universal. But tokens in general were something that can be used across both villainy and heroism, and I felt like had some potential. The thing was, when we were going through the set, the whole set was built around coordinate and exploit, and honestly, the cards that are shining from there are not. The idea behind this mechanic, the idea behind either creating a bunch of units, attacking with them, and then getting more value through exploiting, or even the vice versa, which is getting more units and pumping them up and attacking their base for more value and just crushing down your opponent, isn't really that viable in Star Wars Unlimited, unfortunately. And the big reason is because of the action economy. Now, I did mention this when we were talking about set 3, but I was hopeful, I guess you could say, that some of the set 3 mechanics would bolster these tokens enough to where you could actually go ahead and use these strategies, right? And so it's things like Bombing Run and things like Bloodsport and these types of board wipe effects. I felt like, okay, maybe these things will see a lot more play because of these token strategies were going to be viable. Unfortunately, none of that was the case. And, well, none of them really succeeded. We don't see tokens in any of the top decks. If you look, okay, Jango Red, are we seeing any tokens? No. Sabine Green, are we seeing any tokens? In fact, we don't even see any set 3 cards, really. No. Han Double Yellow, are we seeing any tokens? No. I suppose you could count Plo Koon in like that coordinate strategy where you have multiple units on the board, but there's no tokens there, right? So that doesn't really count. Bosk Blue, Anakin Blue, like, are these tokens? Nope, and no. And they're not even playing against these strategies, so you really don't see tokens anywhere. Like, you could go to a tournament and not see a single Battle Droid or Clone Trooper token at all throughout the entire tournament. Although there are some set 3 cards and leaders that are extremely successful, the tokens were not even close. Like, they are real stinkers. And yes, you could consider, okay, some exploit strategies, some coordinate strategies do work. Like, if you want to play Count Dooku Blue, it's not a bad deck. It's definitely like in that B tier level. It can definitely pull out some wins and do some good stuff. But it was nowhere near coming close to a competitive strategy, and tokens in general just didn't at all. Like, you didn't even break into like A tier for the most part in terms of viable strategies. So tokens, big flop. And the next one honestly might be a little bit controversial because I know some people are trying to dive into more Palpatine decks, but I've been playing a lot of Palpatine. I enjoy control strategies. I know. You're fuming right now. Some of you are fuming. It is what it is. I enjoy all strategies, but I actually tend to lean towards some more options in controlling the board. And Chancellor Palpatine appealed to me because I felt like this is a leader that could go in that direction. No flip. Really need to get into the long game to constantly get value back and forth. This is one of those leaders where knowledge gap and the kind of knowledge of matchups really reflected in how well you did with Palpatine. Because some people didn't understand Palpatine himself, but more importantly, because of how Palpatine works, right? The whole idea behind getting a rebel unit or a heroism unit defeated was your goal with Palpatine. Once you get the flip started, it is really, really effective. But the ability to lane dodge and get rid of the potential start of a Palpatine flip is really, really conducive to winning a game of Star Wars Unlimited against Palpatine. But also on that note, really trying to mess with their curve options, right? Getting them to flip in unideal times, or just getting them to the point where they flip and are unable to flip back because they go ahead and defeat your clone trooper token at the right time. This is something that I have had major success with at the very beginning, playing on Tabletop Simulator, playing against other players. But as people started to understand Palpatine more, and as people started to expect certain things coming from Palpatine, it became a lot more difficult to win. Not that it was a terrible deck, again, similar to the difference between Jango and S tier and this and B tier. This is more of like a middle high B tier to maybe even low A tier deck, which I felt like it was having some major success. Again, this is one of those things where more practice ended up being that Palpatine ended up playing a lot worse than I thought it would have. And the last card we're going to talk about is Plo Koon. Now, this one's interesting because my initial rating of this guy was, he looks pretty good, like seems reasonable. I'm not sure how often you're going to be able to get coordinate to turn on and whether or not this is actually going to end up working out for you in terms of a 6 power, but even a 5 resource 3/6 ambusher seemed pretty reasonable. It had the force tag. I was like, yeah, seems pretty good to me. I wouldn't be surprised to see this guy be played. He ended up being far better than I expected. Things like double yellow Han, this is something that you actually have to fear in that deck. You can easily go and do something like Plo Koon comes down. He's a 3/6, kills one of your earlier units because you can get him down early. And then he starts to become a massive threat, or even just, okay, I'm deploying him alongside another drop while I get Han down. And I don't want to go for this 7 resource play. Just getting Han down, getting him exhausted, and then playing, alongside that 6 resources, a 5 resource Plo Koon that's a 6/6 is amazing. You have decks like Quinlan Voss that honestly seem to be viable because of Plo Koon, right? You get Plo Koon down alongside Quinlan Voss. He's going to have 6 power very frequently because you have another unit alongside that. And suddenly he's hitting something for 7, right? 5 or less resources because you get the ping from Quinlan. So you can take down leaders with this, which is absolutely insane. We have decks like Yoda, Yellow, which have top 8'd with things like now there are 2 of them alongside Plo Koon because Plo Koon's a great option to go ahead, and now there are 2 of them into. It's just so many different things work with Plo Koon and so many things set up Plo Koon and really, really kind of build their decks around some of this payoff that it makes it so Plo Koon is far better. He is one of the cards where I'm like, okay, he is legitimately one of the best cards from set 3. It is super, super excellent. And definitely outshines a lot of the legendaries that we thought were going to be solid, but just absolutely, absolutely amazing. We're talking like just a card that you have to think about. And that's something that really, really kind of changes the game, right? When you're playing in these competitive settings and you're like, okay, I need to pay attention to their Podameron Wrecker from Sabine. I need to not set up, or how does this affect the game when Podameron comes down? That is the type of card that Plo Koon ends up being in a lot of situations, and that is a scary, scary card. And to be fair, you could have said something about P38 and like Perilous Position as well in terms of these other decks, but it wasn't a card that had a strong kind of out the gate opinion. I didn't have a video talking about those cards, so they're not necessarily on the list. They were cards that we all kind of stumbled into while we were playing these various decks. We're like, hey, dealing damage might be good with Jango, or Perilous Position might be good against some of the the flyers that are in the game right now, and that's something that's pretty good. So definitely gotta call myself out on some of these cards, but I'm sure there's more that we could talk about. These are just some of the ones that are kind of noticeable, kind of call outs for me, and some cards that you definitely need to reevaluate if you took a look at them yourself. Specifically Jango, and I think Hello there were the top ones, but let me know what you think in the comment section down below. Thanks for watching, everyone, and I'll see you all for the next one.